Okay, now moving on now, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for today, who is Dame Rotha Johnston, who is chair of the Northern Ireland Productivity Forum. She also has a number of other roles, which I'll just reel out. She's also director of Choice. She's chair of Northern Ireland Screen, and she also has a number of non-exec director roles as well. She's also been a BBC trustee, Pro-Chancellor and Chair of the Senate at Queen's University in Belfast, and Deputy Chair of Invest Northern Ireland. In 2006, she was awarded the CBE in recognition of her contribution to industry in Northern Ireland, and in 2016 was made a Dame. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Rotha for our keynote address. Rotha.
Well, good morning, everyone. And can I start by saying how much I enjoyed Peter's discussion with Bart and how much of that resonates with me. But let me start with a disclaimer on my own account. I'm not an expert on productivity. I'm not an economist, a researcher, or indeed an academic. But I am, however, someone who's worked across a range of sectors, including my own business. I've worked in economic development, in textiles, in foods, in media, banking, and in energy. And I've seen it firsthand, the benefits of a focus on strategic productivity. In other words, focusing on what are the main drivers in the business. And I've also witnessed the lack of impact on a focus on the drivers of growth in a business. Now, as most of you who are listening or watching, we have a very poor record on productivity within the UK. UK productivity stagnated in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis and has not yet recovered. And the reason that it's something we should care about is because it is the single most important indicator of a nation's standard of living. At a national level, productivity is really the only source of long-term sustained growth. So what exactly is productivity and why is it important for business in particular? As Bart mentioned in his introduction, when we hear the term productivity, it's normally coming from words uttered by politicians, economists, or indeed journalists, and generally relates to the state of a national or regional economy, often commenting on how different countries are performing against the UK's performance and benchmarks against other places. For most of us, it's something that governments do at a macro level, and yet businesses are the main drivers of productivity growth. And while we know that productivity measures the total value of output produced for a given amount of work, productivity is a difficult term. It's hard to define and hard to measure. The interpretation of what it means differs in different functions of a business and sometimes also in different businesses. In a recent paper by Professor Diane Coyle and Jen Chung Mai, it was noted that the term productivity itself has a meaning in everyday use that differs from its meaning in economics. For example, in business, the variable of interest will often be engineering efficiency or perhaps revenue, or value added per hour worked in current price terms, whereas economists are interested in real terms output or value added per hour. So the result is that improved productivity for a machine operator will be different for those working in other functions in the business, for example, in marketing, where efficient or innovative use of social media or data analytics may be the biggest driver of improved productivity, or the sales team where a new CRM system will help drive growth. Andy Haldane, who would be known to many of you, the previous chief economist at the Bank of England and many other roles, has also shared his views on the meaning of productivity, showing little love for the word, I would say. He quoted that it's a terrible word as it leaves most people dazed and confused. Fewer are those who can define it, and fewer still are those who can measure it. But despite his lack of affection for the word, there was no greater proponent for the need of a greater focus on productivity if we are to improve our economy and the living standards of employees. It determines competitiveness, the level of wages and living standards employees enjoy. As Peter noted already, in times of economic crisis such as now, all companies are facing energy and spiraling inflationary costs. And Peter talked about the pressure in terms of wages pressures across many companies. We've got a recession potentially just around the corner, and many businesses are dealing with the here and now, trying to put out fires in a game of whack-a-mole, solving problems in a piecemeal fashion, and often resulting in only temporary or minor improvement. I think it was John F. Kennedy who said, "The time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining." And his quote is equally applicable to business. Those companies that have worked on their productivity in the good times will fare much better during the current economic turbulence. Of course, this current economic storm comes on the heels of the impact of the COVID pandemic. Just think about the impact that's had on so many of our lives and so many businesses. While some companies just simply could not survive the storm, others pivoted to new digital technologies almost overnight. And many businesses have not and will not return to the previous normal business model, whatever that means. The tragedy of the pandemic forced a major disruption in all global markets, and many businesses and organizations are using this experience to help drive productivity by finding new, more efficient ways of working and maximizing the use of technology. Physical proximity is now less of a constraint in many businesses, which means places that were out of bounds are now open for business. Businesses that could not previously accommodate a working from home policy had to make their operation fully remote almost overnight. Just think about how each of our own lives and IT skills have changed in the last 2 years and how much more we are reliant on technology to get things done. And today's conference is a perfect example. In thinking about today, I had a look at the McKinsey Global Survey of 900 C-level executives that was carried out towards the end of 2020. And respondents to that survey noted their companies had accelerated the digitization of supply chains interactions and their internal operations by 3 to 4 years. They also noted the share of digitally enabled products in their portfolios had accelerated by some 7 years. The most significant increases were not surprisingly in digital adoption, were in healthcare, pharma, financial services, and professional services. I think the important issue to note here is that when respondents were asked why their organizations had not implemented the changes before the crisis, executives often cited organizational and technology issues. The required changes represented too big a shock to established ways of working, our IT infrastructure was insufficient, or simply that the organizational silos impeded commitment and execution of the required changes. The issue of organizational silos is one that anyone who's worked in any sector can identify with. This is my team, it's my space. We will not have another department tell us what to do, or it's just all too difficult. I recall in one organization I worked in, or rather I should say I owned, the resistance to changing the IT system. It was claimed that it was too disruptive, too expensive, and perhaps too frightening for some, yet the IT system was a barrier to growth, providing insufficient and inadequate information to make strategic decisions, including an investment, and it affected company growth. When we did eventually invest in a new system, the information intelligence the system provided accelerated company growth and profitability. Improvements in productivity can be achieved within singular functions of the business. We heard from Peter Cheese earlier about the role of HR, the important role of human capital and investing for long-term development of the business and skills. There is much that can be done at a functional level. For example, operations, digital transformation, finance, and marketing can all assist in their own way in improving productivity. But if productivity is to be taken seriously in a business, it needs to be addressed in a strategic and coordinated manner. Often there will be trade-offs between different functions. Finance will not want to approve the new software, the e-vehicles are too costly, spend to save initiatives are poorly understood, and the status quo business planning model is easier to understand and causes much less angst and uncertainty amongst employees. But the main levers of productivity go beyond single organizational functions. The entire business needs to be moving in the same direction to achieve and maximize growth. Sorry, someone's just arrived at the door. I'm going to tell them to come in, apologies. The main levers go beyond single organizational functions. The entire business needs to be moving in the same direction to achieve alignment and maximize productivity. And it's for this reason that the role of the leadership team, the CEO, directors, and managers is vitally important in discussing and focusing on strategic productivity. In a recent article in the Times, David Whiten opined that anyone who has watched The Office may well have an idea why Britain suffers from a long-term problem and low productivity. In the hit television series, the Slough branch of Burnham Hogg, and I'm sure many of you will have watched it, a paper merchant, is portrayed as a hive of inactivity. The article goes on to say most viewers would surely see that the problem is less to do with the staff than the excruciatingly inept management of Ricky Gervais's David Brent. And while we know that the sitcom is indeed a work of fiction, it does point to the important role leadership and management play in setting the strategic direction and focus of the business. The main levers of productivity go beyond single functions. They are cross-cutting, and impact on every aspect of the business, notably workforce skills, management competencies, and digital transformation. International evidence demonstrates that management practices really matter for a firm's performance. Firms with better management, and we heard Peter discuss that earlier, firms with better management practices have higher profitability, survival rates, and growth. It's also true that the culture in a company is driven from the top and permeates throughout the business, specifically in terms of the values, behaviours, and attitudes that make the business unique. A real focus on productivity will facilitate increased value creation across the organisation, impacting on the well-being and incomes of all employees. Functional areas working in collaborative ways can create a whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. Leaders therefore need to work together to optimise productivity across the firm. But for productivity to be embedded in a business, it needs to be elevated to the boardroom and become part of the strategy, business planning, target setting, performance tracking, and rewards framework within the business. The chair, the CEO, and the board can make productivity part of the boardroom discussion on growth and value creation. The senior team can explicitly commit to making better use of its resources and getting better results. This will mean being able to clearly identify the key indicators that create productivity in the business and setting clear, achievable targets. That can be anything from downtime of machines, call response rate to customers, or using data analytics in sales and marketing. Essentially, all of the components of the business working to increase value and productivity. Business leaders can integrate productivity into the business planning and company strategy, for example, by committing to the use of better resources through a combination of investment in skills, better management, digital innovation, and informed budget management. Rather than working in silos, collaboration across functions helps to provide a better approach to improving productivity. Understanding the workflow from one division, such as how manufacturing impacts on packaging and dispatch can impact greatly, how that can improve opportunities across the organisation. I was recently talking to Andy Haldane, and we talked about productivity, and I think he's used the term previously about the recipe for productivity. And in that discussion, he noted that the recipe for productivity is unique to every business, and perhaps the most important ingredient is the one that is missing. And for some, that might be the focus on digitization, for others, innovation, R&D, financing, or training and development for current and indeed future skills. For others, there will be multiple ingredients missing, and the issue will be the order in which they should be addressed. In summary, why do businesses need to approach strategic productivity differently going forward? Firms should use productivity as a strategic opportunity to manage short-term pressure while not losing sight of the long-term opportunities. It's not a question of idle employees working harder, as some have suggested, but for business leaders to work smarter, to understand the drivers of productivity in the business and how one department's impacts on the others, so creating a waterfall effect on productivity throughout the business. A key aspect of this is communication and employee engagement, setting out the ambition of the organisation, the objectives to be achieved, and identifying how each area of the business contributes to the delivery of the plan. I'm chair of NIE Networks, which is the transmission and distribution business in Northern Ireland, and I'm very pleased to say that we have a very successful employee engagement board that meets quarterly. It involves all of the senior managers and the board. And the issues that are discussed range from anything in terms of the planning for the organisation, the health and safety, agile working hours, terms and conditions, and indeed innovation. The organisation has set up a programme for innovation ideas to come from employees. And around 2/3 of the innovation ideas that have come from employees through that iHub, Innovation Hub in the organisation, which was a suggestion from employees, have actually been adopted by the organisation. I think that's a very good model to show just how much that those who work in the business actually can improve the performance and the productivity of the organisation. I realise, of course, that businesses at this point in time need to hunker down in the current environment. But how they position companies, how companies position themselves to take advantage from the upturn that will inevitably come after the difficulties that they're currently in is really important. I'm pleased to be a member of the work of the Productivity Institute as I chair the forum in Northern Ireland. And Bart has asked me to think about how the Productivity Institute can help going forward. So just some thoughts. I think, first of all, The concept of having the fora across the UK is really helpful, because you can see that productivity challenges are different in different places across the UK. So that engagement model, I think, is good. I would suggest perhaps more engagement with ambassadors, and more socializing of the challenges and the opportunities for business would be helpful. As I've mentioned, and as Peter has mentioned, and Bart has said in the introduction, for many businesses, I think there's a sort of that's something that happens at a national level. So some case studies looking at how companies have actually improved productivity, and the indicators that have been set, I think would be helpful. That could be issues in terms of response rate to complaints, or production methods, or the amount of leads arising from use of data analytics and marketing. All of those sorts of issues would be really helpful. I think keep on the great work with the podcasts and the media coverage. I think that's really helpful. The Institute has helped raise the discussion on productivity at a national level, and also in terms of benchmarking. But look, I'm just going to close it at that point and look forward to the further discussion. Thank you.